up there. As it says up there, the title of my talk is, Are You Taking a Journey, or Is the Journey Taking You? And I want to find out first is, how many of you have been on a journey this summer? Where you went, great. Where'd you go, John? Maui, nice. Who else has been on a journey? Anybody? Lodi, that works. Lodi's sweet. Okay, LA, nice. Okay, so, well, those who feel a little envious, I want us to explore the idea that whether we recognize it or not, we're always on a journey, but that of the soul. We like to play in life, and so we often forget that we're on this journey, either consciously or unconsciously. It's kind of like if you go to a movie and you know how everything is going to play out, and even how it ends. It's not all that exciting or even fun. However, some of you like to be in control. Anybody feel like you can kind of predict what's going on in your journey? You got things, you know, where you want them, you know what's going to happen next? Anybody want to admit to it? Great. How about some of you who may feel that you're totally kind of out of control in your journey? Things are coming at you way too fast. You're kind of juggling things that you didn't even know you had to juggle. Anybody want to admit to that? Okay, yeah, I think we can all relate to that on some level. So let's take a look at first when the journey could be taking you and what that might look like. In order to do this, I want to share an experience I had back when I was about 7. And I was hiking on a journey with my family down this steep canyon trail. I was the youngest, so I was a little competitive back then, and I thought I could beat my brothers to the bottom. So I began walking pretty quickly, and then I started to skip, and then I started to run. And before I knew it, my legs took off on their own. I felt like from the waist up, I was merely a spectator. And pretty soon I knew that I was totally out of control, that I would not be able to stop on my own. I needed a speed bump or an emergency brake, and I realized that this whole idea of beating my brothers to the bottom was not the most brilliant one I had ever come up with. I saw this huge pile of branches, and next to that was a big giant tree. I chose the tree because I thought it would be less painful. Crashing forcefully into it, I flung backwards, and apparently I wasn't humiliated enough because the large canteen that I've been wearing around my neck came crashing right down onto me. It was kind of like that coyote cartoon, you know, where the coyote goes off the cliff and then the anvil comes down on top of him. Well, I want to point out, if it's not already obvious, this is how the journey can take you, and it's not how to do it. I want you to think about what this looks like on a day-to-day basis, and how often our thought patterns can build a momentum on their own, just like my legs did. Perhaps they begin with a tiny idea or an opinion that maybe you heard from the background TV or a radio, and you're rather busy, so you don't challenge whatever assumption that's being made on the TV, but you begin to kind of believe some negative idea that it's putting out there. Maybe you start to think that you really do need all those pharmaceutical drugs to get through your morning. Or you might think just this overall gnawing sense of lack and fear. You then add more evidence throughout your day. You might even confirm your inadequate feelings with your neighbor, saying, "Don't you just think this is awful?" Or call a friend and tell them how bad your life is because you just don't have all the things that the TV is requesting that you get. As you walk around through the day, the universe kind of confirms by drawing more into your experience that what you're complaining about. It recognizes what you're giving your attention to. And that's why it's so important to be not to get caught up in this downward spiral of thinking. Because pretty soon you're left wondering why your only options are tree or pile of branches. I have this button that I carry around to remind me. It says, "I think, therefore I'm dangerous." And I wish that I could learn from the wisdom of the past and just say, whew, I'm glad I don't have to do that again. But I had this other experience that I think is appropriate, again, here in the setting. I was weeding one day out in front of my yard, and I had this big garbage bin right next to me. And yet I was mentally still in this argument that I had had with a coworker hours earlier. And I just remember throwing the weeds in the trash and just really still trying to win that argument. And as I stepped back, I stepped onto the lid of the dangling trash bin, and it flung over and shoved me right in head first. And it was such an eye-opener for me because my thoughts were already in the trash, so of course my body had to follow. If I had began my activities, including the hill one, much more consciously and deliberately before natural laws like gravity took over, it would have been far less painful. So too in this teaching, we have natural laws. Laws of cause and effect, laws of attraction. Thoughts compile on other thoughts, growing them into experiences and beliefs that sometimes we get stuck in. Now, the good or bad thing is there is an impersonal law that acts upon our predominant way of thinking. It doesn't care how nice you've been or how much you really, really want something. It kind of taps into those core beliefs that you have about it. It picks up on that momentum of the dominant thought and really builds on it. So sometimes we truly do feel blindsided. We might say, whoa, where did that come from? I was not thinking that a moment ago. And that's where it gets tricky because we sometimes have to trace that little seed of thought or original belief back to in order to just dispel it. When we get to where our thoughts have put us on that uncontrollable downward spiral thing, all we can do is just react. Tree or branches, yell or run away, punch or just hide. It goes back to that primitive kind of reaction system that we have. So, what do we do about it? Well, fortunately, I've been a seeker because I don't like having humiliating experiences repeated. And recently, Reverend Kathy recommended that we get this book, SQ21. Anybody else get this? Oh, great. Well, first of all, I have to tell you, Reverend Kathy is more of a math person. Me, not so much. And so, don't tell Reverend Kathy this, but I was even afraid of math teachers growing up. And so when I saw this book, all I could think of was an algebra equation that I could never really figure out. Anybody else have that reaction to this? And I thought, I'm not reading a book about math. I intentionally got out of that when I graduated. So anyway, I had to skim through it. And I thought, I'm going to check and see what it really says in here. So I used to think I didn't need my glasses for small print, and then I would come to a word and try and fill it in real quickly and make it up, and it didn't make sense afterwards. So thank goodness for reading glasses. On page 134, Cindy Wigglesworth said, one quick back thing though. Kathy put up on the board, I think last week, a whole spectrum of 4 quadrants that said awareness is so very important. And so in order to get kind of control of this out of control thinking, the first thing we need to do is be aware and then stop and breathe. And so in this she says, believe it or not, slow, deep breaths can help to manage ego activation on a biological level. You may notice that when your ego response is triggered, your breathing becomes rapid and shallow. So taking long, slow belly breaths signals to your body that all is well. After all, who would be taking long, slow, relaxed breaths if a tiger were attacking? Doing this tells your body and brain and body that there is no threat present. This reactivates the parasympathetic nervous system that in turn calms the limbic system and allows your higher brain to come back online. If you do this silently for just a few moments, you create space for your higher self to be heard. You will get relief on just the first breath. And by doing this four or five of these, I always find that my body hormones have shifted and my higher self can come back into the picture. How many of you have experienced this? Just by stopping and taking those breaths. I heard once that between stimulus and response, we have a choice. We can choose how to respond and slow down the moment our thoughts start kind of going where we don't want them to do. So just breathing can take us out of that flight or fright mode and allow us to respond in a new appropriate way. When you feel like your thoughts might be running amok, you have to ask yourself, do I really want to see this thought become exponential? Fortunately, we have a little bit of time in between before we start seeing them manifested. You could say, do I want to view this on the movie screen of my life? So just by recognizing that you can find that better feeling thought can help shift your direction into something more positive. You need to search your awareness a bit and think how your situation could be a little different. What is another perspective that you can take on that old opinion that you've become so comfortable with? Sometimes we get so attached to our perspective, though, wanting to be right. Anybody relate to that? Just hanging on. It's kind of like that canteen, though, whacking you when you're down. You have to ask, you got to be right, but is it worth the pain? You get to hang on to that attitude, and yet until you're ready to let it go, things don't always shift. Another way to respond on our journey, another spiritual tool is to practice. Practice forming new beliefs and visualize what you want to have occur. Practice early seeing the positive outcome of a situation before it kind of takes off on its own momentum. Once again, in order to make this clear, I want to share an experience that happened about 27 years ago, right after my wedding. My husband and I figured we had already done the scariest thing we could do by getting married, so why not go skydiving? Any other skydivers out there? No? Oh, yes, good. We have a few other survivors. Well, we chose to go in tandem, which means that you're kind of hooked up to the person, the jump master, by a little chain, and all I had to do was stay connected to him, or so I thought. And so he was going to pull the chute, do all the work. So we went up in this little tiny plane. We went with my husband, a friend of ours, and my sister. And I felt pretty relaxed. I was kind of teasing my husband because he was doing this whole thing that you have to do, counting for 20 seconds with your arms like this, and then you have to arch your back and then they pull the chute, and all's well that ends well, hopefully. Well, as I said, kind of teased my husband, saying, "What are you doing? Your palms are sweaty. Just relax. It's either fly or die." And yeah. Anyway, I was the first one out. And when I jumped out of the plane, I think my brain stayed on board because I began to flap my arms like a bird. That's what I do in my flying dreams, and I did not look like an angel. I thought, I'm going to keep us up even if this chute doesn't work. And I kept on going like that. Well, the jump master realized he kind of had a crazy woman on his hands. So he grabbed my arms and shoved them back down under my chest because we're starting to go into a spin, which I guess is a bad thing. Talking about a downward spiral, not good. So my friend, then I calmed down, of course, and we landed and all that. Well, our friend, big macho guy, he hung on to the side of the plane bars. His hands had to be pried open and they had to push him. My sister screamed all the way down. In fact, we could hear her before we could see her. The only one to do it perfectly was my husband, who mentally practiced beforehand. He saw the positive outcome, and so he wasn't flipping out like everybody else. If we can just take a moment before challenges on our journey to see that positive outcome, it can lead to a major shift. We can then bring forth from within ourselves responsibility instead of just react ability. The brain does not know the difference between an observed event, the memory of an event, or an imagined event. It kind of processes them all in that moment of now. So if you keep reliving those same old stories, it's kind of like you rip that wound off and then draw similar experiences that confirm whatever negative event happened. Take a look at what you might be getting from telling your story, however. Perhaps you're getting a payoff indirectly, and until you recognize this, it's hard to let go. Maybe it's just the attention you get from your friends for perhaps being more of a victim in that role that you're playing. And so what we need to do is change it so we have more power in our lives. How can you become the hero instead? I was up at the music festival yesterday or 2 days ago, and a woman played about 3 songs, and they were all about the hero's journey and how she overcame obstacles, and each song became more powerful and strong. She went from victim to survivor to thriver. And so you're making up this life story or life song. You might as well sing it the way you want it to be. We're approaching the Olympics. Any Olympic fans out there? Great. And we might not be able to perform like them. I know I can't. But we can borrow from their training techniques. Many Olympians practice their routines in their mind's eye first, especially the gymnasts, who can get really injured if they do things like I did. So what they do first is mentally see a perfect routine without any issues, and then they go out and they do it much better. In fact, the German athletes used to do this a lot before the bobsled, and I was just so impressed with their deep, focused concentration. In fact, brain science is beginning to show us that we can set new thought processes in motion. We can strengthen the neuron receptors and create new connections in our brains just by doing something called meditation. If we can meditate, we not only break the momentum of that downward spiral thinking, but we can heal parts of our brain that have been damaged in the past. Dr. Johnny gave me this article that I found really powerful. It's called Growing the Mind to Heal the Brain. And on page 60, Dr. Hendricks states that the Buddha and his followers developed their powerful psychology over lifetimes of intense inner work. Yet we now know that the process of change can be quite rapid. Recent research reveals that activity in the brain regions responsible for focused attention is strengthened after only 4 hours of meditation practice. Only 11 hours of practice is required for new tissue to grow. That's so exciting for those of us who don't want to go live in a cave for 20 years. The insights of mind training from Buddhist psychology practiced with the focused attention acquired from simple meditation techniques empower us to stay in the now moment, at the very edge of the wave of emergent becoming. As we do this, we are intentionally, not accidentally, engaging and directing the power of neurogenesis and epigenetics to heal the wounds of the past and to restore to us our right to be whatever we choose. This is where we can take the journey and not be taken by it. It is so exciting when science is beginning to back up our teaching. We always knew we were religious scientists, but when the mainstream starts recognizing it, it's truly validating on many levels. Just for a moment now, I'd like to do a process with you, and it would be helpful if you closed your eyes to tune out any distractions. So if you would, just go ahead and get comfortable, and as I said, closing your eyes will help. That way you can't see me dart out the back. No. And first I want you to just be aware of how you're feeling and what your predominant thoughts are right now. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're concerned about something in the past or the future. Or maybe you're actually listening to my voice and not thinking much at all. Don't judge your thoughts. Just be aware of them. Now, take 4 deep conscious breaths. Feel your lungs filling up, and then blow the air out. Be deliberate in slow, long breaths. I now want you to visualize or see or think of something you are trying to work through. Perhaps it's an unresolved challenge on your journey. Something that you want to have happen, perhaps. Now I want you to shift to the end result and see it as being perfectly resolved and complete. Think about what the outcome would feel like. You don't have to picture how it will get done. That's what the universe is for. But visualize and get in touch with how you feel now that everything has worked out for your best and highest good. Imagine people congratulating you for getting through this. Imagine the relief that you feel from all components coming together perfectly. Remember, we're talking about accessing an energy, a power that keeps planets rotating in space, a force that causes our blood to circulate throughout our bodies. It allows our hair to grow and creates life out of stardust. It has more than enough knowledge and capability to create these demonstrations in your life. Feel the elation as you take another deep breath. And as you exhale, know it is done and all is well. You don't have to know how the details will come together. Just trust the process. Okay, you can open your eyes now if you haven't already done so. And you might want to work through this, try this a little bit more on your own, and just think of those things that you truly want to see in their perfect state. And I encourage you to get behind the feeling of it. Feeling is so key in moving through things. Ernest Holmes once stated, "Principle is not bound by precedent." Just because something didn't happen before does not mean that it can't happen. It's always a belief that keeps it from being realized. Going back to the Olympians for a moment, no one believed that a 6-minute mile could be run until someone did. No one believed that a human could jump higher than 8 feet until someone did. So just because you don't see your demonstrations right in front of you right now doesn't mean they're not happening on a vibrational level. We are truly always pushing limits to create new experiences. We're on the leading edge of this creation evolvement. So truly begin to believe that you can add momentum to each thought you have. And just by recognizing it and feeling that joy too that comes with the journey, for that's part of the process. Okay, I want to simplify this whole talk, reduce it to its common denominator. That math term was for Kathy, in case she asked. Here they are, the ABCs of the journey. A is for awareness. Have awareness of what you are thinking. You might like it or want to shift it, but at least notice what direction your thoughts are moving in. B stands for breathing. Breathe deeply and consciously. That helps allow the shift to occur. Finally, C stands for see the outcome that you want. Visualize or see the end result as being good and full of joy. Now I want to leave you with a brief little poem that I composed last night. No need for crashing or self-trashing. Know your desire, breathe, and inspire. It's not too late to meditate. Take the journey higher. Thank you so much for listening, and namaste.